Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something quite specific, but really important: the right to vote for people who are detained in the Philippines.
Yeah, it's a topic that doesn't always get a lot of airtime.
Exactly. And you might assume, if someone's in jail, they lose their right to vote. Simple as that.
But it's not quite that straightforward, is it?
Not at all. We've been looking through the Philippine Constitution, election laws, Camelic rules, even Supreme Court rulings.
Quite a range of sources.
And they paint a much more, detailed picture. So our mission today is to figure out who exactly can vote while detained, who can't, and, why this whole thing matters for democracy.
And what's really striking from the outset is this core idea that just because someone is detained, it doesn't automatically mean they're cut off from the democratic process.
Right. It kind of makes you stop and think. So let's start at the beginning. The foundation. The Philippine Constitution. Article V, Section 1.
That's the suffrage article.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It basically says, look, if you're a Filipino citizen, you're at least 18, you've lived in the Philippines for a year, and in your voting area for 6 months before the election, you can vote.
Seems broad.
It does. Very inclusive on the face of it. But there's that little phrase, not otherwise disqualified by law.
Ah, yes. That's the crucial qualifier. The Constitution grants the right widely, but it also allows for laws that can set specific limits or disqualifications.
And that's our entry point into detainee voting specifically, because the general rule, which I have found pretty surprising actually, is that being detained doesn't automatically strip you of your vote.
Correct. It's not an automatic disenfranchisement. The legal system seems to default to preserving that right unless there's a very specific legal reason not to.
It feels like a nod to the fundamental nature of suffrage, even in difficult circumstances.
Definitely. It suggests that your civic identity isn't completely erased just by being detained.
Okay, so what laws actually prop this up? What makes it possible for some detainees to vote?
Well, you've got the main omnibus selection code. That's Batas Pambansa 881. Then there's the Voters' Registration Act, RA 80189.
And that Biometrics Act too, right? RA 10367.
Yes, making sure registrations are secure. And crucially, the specific rules and regulations that Kamalik itself has issued for detainee voting.
So it's not just a principle, there's a whole framework there.
Absolutely. These laws and rules outline the who and the how, the practicalities of making voting happen inside detention centers while still keeping elections fair.
Okay, let's get specific then. Who can vote while detained? The sources seem to highlight two main groups. First up, detainees under preventive detention.
Right. So preventive detention means someone is being held while their trial is actually ongoing. They haven't been found guilty by a final judgment yet.
And this links back to a huge constitutional idea.
The presumption of innocence. Exactly. Since the legal process isn't finished and they haven't been definitively convicted, they generally keep their civil and political rights.
Including the right to vote.
Including the right to vote. It really pushes back against the notion that just being accused or held means you lose all your civic standing.
It certainly does. Okay, second group. People who have been convicted, but maybe their case is on appeal, or the conviction isn't final for some other reason.
Their status, legally speaking for voting purposes, is quite similar to those in preventive detention.
Because it's still not final.
Precisely. As long as the judicial process hasn't reached that point of finality, the conviction doesn't yet trigger disqualification. So their right to vote generally remains intact.
Okay, that clarifies who can vote. Now, the flip side, who can't? Where do the laws draw the line for disqualification?
The main line is drawn by Section 155 of the Omnibus Election Code. It disqualifies individuals who've been convicted by a final judgment.
Final judgment being the key phrase there.
Absolutely. And specifically for crimes where the punishment is more than 1 year of imprisonment. That's a clear threshold.
But it's not just about how long the sentence is it? The sources also mention specific types of crimes.
That's right. Conviction by final judgment for crimes involving disloyalty to the government, things like rebellion, sedition, actions directly against the state, that also leads to disqualification.
Which seems logical in a way. If you've acted against the state, maybe losing your say in its governance follows.
It reflects a societal judgment about participation, certainly.
Then there's this other category that feels a bit fuzzier. Crimes involving moral turpitude.
Ah, yes. Moral turpitude. It's a legal term that the Supreme Court has defined.
How so?
They've described it as involving acts of baseness, vileness, or depravity.
Hmm.
Basically, conduct that goes against accepted private and social duties and fundamental moral standards.
That sounds quite broad, like it could cover a lot of different things depending on interpretation.
It is broad, and its application really hinges on the specific facts of a case and how the courts see it. But the core idea is that certain acts are considered so inherently wrong, so morally reprehensible, that they justify removing the right to vote.
Okay, so let's say a detainee fits into the can vote category. How does it actually work? They don't just get a day pass to go to their local school, I assume.
No, definitely not. That would be a logistical nightmare. This is where Comlex steps in quite significantly.
Yeah.
They set up special polling precincts inside the jails, city jails, district jails, municipal jails.
Ah, so the voting happens right there.
Exactly. It contains the process, manages security, and avoids the issues of transporting detainees.
But wait, how do they even get registered if they're already detained?
Good question. Kamalek actually conducts voter registration drives within the detention facilities. It's called off-site registration.
So they bring the registration process to the detainees.
Correct, to ensure that those who are eligible actually have the chance to get on the voter rolls.
And the voting itself, is it different, special ballots?
Nope, it sounds quite standard, actually. They use the regular official ballots, follow the usual voting procedures. It just happens within that special precinct set up inside the jail.
So the experience aims to be as close as possible to voting outside.
That seems to be the goal, yes. Obviously, within the security constraints, you have comm-like officials, election officers, and personnel from the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, the BJMP, all overseeing it.
Makes sense. Now, you mentioned Supreme Court cases earlier. Our sources highlight one from 1999, Kyanon versus Kamalek. Sounds important.
Oh, Kanong was absolutely pivotal. The Supreme Court didn't just confirm that detainees could vote if qualified.
What else?
They actually ordered Kamalek to set up the necessary mechanisms to allow it. It wasn't just a theoretical right. The court mandated practical implementation.
That's a strong move by the court, putting the onus on Kamalek.
Very much so. It signaled the judiciary's commitment to making this right meaningful.
And then there was another case, Halaska versus Kamalek in 2013. Did that change things?
Halaska essentially reinforced the principles from Kyanon. It reiterated the voting rights of detainees whose convictions weren't yet final. It solidified the legal standing.
So these cases built a solid legal precedent over time.
Exactly. They provide strong jurisprudential backing for the current system.
It's also interesting to see how this fits internationally. Does the Philippines approach align with, say, global human rights standards?
It does seem to. The sources point to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR.
Article 25.
Yes, Article 25. It guarantees citizens the right to take part in public affairs, including voting, without unreasonable restrictions. Allowing qualified detainees to vote fits well within that principle.
And there's a UN resolution, too.
Right. UN General Assembly Resolution 45111. It's about basic principles for the treatment of prisoners. It encourages states to uphold the political rights of detainees, especially those not yet convicted or whose convictions are under appeal.
So the Philippine practice isn't happening in a vacuum. It aligns with these broader international norms.
It suggests a commitment to upholding those human rights standards, yes. Balancing security and justice system needs with fundamental political rights.
Okay, so if we were to boil this all down,
Yeah.
the key takeaways.
Well, first, the Philippine legal framework performs this balancing act, right? Between the fundamental right to vote and necessary disqualifications for serious, finalized criminal convictions.
Right. And crucially, it's not automatic disqualification upon detention. Those under preventative detention or appealing convictions generally keep their right to vote, assuming they meet the other standard qualifications.
Exactly. The presumption of innocence is really powerful here. And third, Kamalek's role is absolutely vital in making this happen, practically setting up precincts, handling registration inside jails.
And this whole approach is supported by both Supreme Court decisions and international principles.
That sums it up well. It's a nuanced system grounded in law and rights.
So wrapping up this deep dive, what really stands out, I think, is how the system acknowledges that being part of the justice system, even being detained, doesn't necessarily sever your connection to democratic participation.
That presumption of innocence really anchors the right to vote for many detainees.
It really does, and it prompts you, the listener, to think about what that means for citizenship, for having a voice, even when facing the legal system.
And maybe a final thought to ponder. How does guaranteeing these voting rights for these specific groups of detainees ultimately affect a democracy? Does it strengthen it by being more inclusive? Does it pose challenges?
It's definitely a complex question about rights, responsibilities, and the very definition of democratic participation. Something to think about.